After Ukraine, now what? The EU Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius could have been a turning point for Eastern Europe. But Moscow's pressure on Ukraine has raised questions about the future ties between the six countries and the EU. The high hopes the European Union had for the forthcoming Vilnius summit seemed likely to be dashed. Six former Soviet republics were expected to formally adopt association agreements with the 28-member bloc, offering them close ties to the EU as a precursor to eventual membership. But Ukraine's last-minute announcement that it would not sign, following Russian arm twisting, has left the outcome of the meeting uncertain. Leaders or senior policymakers from Ukraine and its Eastern European neighbors, um, Belarus and Moldova, along with the southern Caucasus states of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, will travel to the Lithuanian capital. All six states are members of the EU's Eastern Partnership, an initiative that began in 2009 as a forum of discussions of economic and other issues between the EU and its eastern neighbors. Cards under the boot. But without an association agreement for Ukraine, there will be no main event at the Third Eastern Partnership Summit. Ukraine is by far the largest and the most populous of the six. Kyiv received the most extensive financial help. According to official data, nearly €500 million between 2007 and 2011. That is twice the aid for Moldova and 3 times that for Georgia. And the aid for Ukraine has steadily been increasing. The EU wants closer ties with former Soviet republics. In 2011, Ukraine was the first country to finish negotiation on an association agreement, which would its tariff-free access to the EU, the world's largest free trade area. But then the conviction and imprisonment of former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko and the charges filed against other opposition politicians outraged EU leaders. The EU delayed the agreement, first to 2012 and then to this year. Vilnius was supposed to be the end of that progress, but just 1 week before the summit, Kyiv gave in to pressure from Moscow, announcing it was shelving preparations for finalize the agreement. The relevant ministry were instead instructed to have an intensive dialogue with Russia and the countries of the customs union. Russia has proposed expanding its customs union with Belarus and Kazakhstan into a Moscow-dominated Eurasian Union. But until now this had drawn little interest from any of the former Soviet states Russia had hoped to herd into it. In contrast, in October GfK polls in Ukraine showed nearly half of Ukrainians in favor of the association agreement, 3 times as many as the members who wanted to join the customs union. Europe's new darling, Moldova has now taken Ukraine's place as the most promising Eastern Partnership country. Chisinau wants its association agreement to be signed before Joe Manuel Barroso stepped down as president of the European Commission in 2014. The EU has hailed Moldova's reforms, saying its democracy is solid, unlike the other countries of the Eastern Partnership. 2 weeks before the summit, Brussels made a surprise announcement that the European Commission would ask the European Council to abolish the visa requirements for Moldovan citizens. Moldovans would thus be the first of the Eastern Partnership citizens to be able to travel to the EU without restrictions. It was an example of the more for more principle. The more reforms a country carries out, the more it gets from Brussels. Granted, the impact would be limited due to the fact that many Moldovans already hold Romanian citizenship, but the gesture was more than symbolic, as the other countries will now expect the same. Georgia is on a European course, but in its zeal to build ties with the EU, Georgia has not been far behind Moldova. Tbilisi also wants to come away from Vilnius with firm plans for an association agreement next year. But whether Georgia can integrate with the EU as quickly as Moldova depends heavily on its internal politics. Brussels advised the new Georgian government not to follow Ukraine's in persecuting opposition leaders. Observers say the association agreement between Georgia and the EU could be in peril if former President Mikhail Saakashvili is jailed. The country also had troubled, but improving, relations with Russia, with which it fought a war in 2008. Since then, Russia has recognized the breakaway Georgian regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia as independent countries, even if it has been unable to persuade many other countries to follow suit. Armenia switches sides. The fourth country that was to sign an association agreement with the EU was Armenia. Last summer, Yerevan and Brussels concluded the negotiations, and Armenia, like Georgia and Moldova, planned to sign the agreement at the summit. But in early September, Armenian President Sarkisian has a private meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, which was quickly followed by a volte-face. Armenia announced a desire to join the Russian customs union instead. Pipe dreams. Azerbaijan, Armenia's sworn enemy since the two sides fought a war over the Nagorno-Karabakh region 20 years ago, does not want to join the customs union with Russia, but nor does Baku plan to sign an agreement with the EU in Vilnius. Relations between Azerbaijan and Europe are dominated by gas. In June 2013, the consortium exploiting the vast shale dense gas field announced it would build the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, which would bring Azerbaijani gas to the EU while bypassing Russian territory. This might be the reason the EU invited Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev to Vilnius despite the country's dismal human rights record and the widespread European condemnation of both rigging in its recent presidential elections. But this criticism may have had one effect. It is not clear if Aliyev will actually come to the summit. Europe's last dictator stays away. Alexander Lukashenko, the authoritarian president of Belarus, a country whose human rights record is arguably even worse than Azerbaijan's, was now shown at the Warsaw Summit 2 years ago. Unsurprisingly, he will not be coming to Vilnius. Only a representative of the Belarusian Foreign Ministry will be there. Belarus is the only member of the Eastern Partnership program under EU sanction. Due to its holding of political prisoners and lack of respect for human rights, the rule of law, and democratic principles. Numerous high officials are banned from traveling to the EU. Experts doubt these sanctions are having much effect, not least because of the important role Belarus plays as a transit country for Russian pipelines. But some European politicians want to use the summit in Vilnius to smooth things over this Belarus. Relations between Lukashenko and Putin have been frosty, and the two countries have quarreled on several issues, notably Belarusian gas debts. Belarus also publicly refused to recognize South Ossetia and Abkhazia. Such options polls as exist in Belarus has shown support growing for closer ties with the EU among Belarusians, but an association agreement or anything like it is unimaginable under the country's current regime. Unable to type on a touch screen, Airwriting may be the solutions for your fat fingers. German researchers have developed a prototype glove that recognizes words written in mid-air. The system could spell the end of the annoying practice of typing text onto tiny touchscreens. You may think the writings on the wall, and you may also think that writing spells the future. But the future is in your hands. That is, in the movement of your hands, because very soon you could be writing all your mobile texts and emails with nothing more than hand gestures. The man behind Airwriting, as the technology is called, is Christoph Alma, a computer scientist and PhD student at Germany's Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, KIT. In his office, Alma picks up a worm climbing glove from where it's lying on the paper stream desk, fitted out with a motion sensor, a Bluetooth wireless transmitter, and a microcontroller. The glove isn't for climbing though. It's a prototype that allows words and even sentences written in the air to be captured and turned into text on the computer. Today, Armar's going to let me take the gloves for a test run. As he slips the glove onto my hand, he tells me the rules. I am only to write in English. I have to use capital letters, and I shouldn't wriggle my wrist around too much. Alma then connects the circuits, and the laptop on his desk springs into life. I try to imagine I'm holding a piece of chalk and writing on an invisible blackboard, and I spell out the word spectrum, the name of DW's science and technology radio program, in midair. Unfortunately, the word fails to appear on the computer screen. It turns out I've picked a rare word that isn't in the system yet. There's a fixed vocabulary of about 8,200 words, says Emma, taken from a list of the most frequent English words. I have another couple of false starts. I keep confusing the system because I'm staring at the computer screen and hesitating instead of continuing to write. Then I get the knack and the sentence, "This is hard and this is easy," which I trace in the air, appears as if by magic on the laptop screen. Patterns, recognitions, algorithm. It isn't magic, though. It's the result of 5 years of hard work. Developing patterns, recognitions, algorithm capable of interpreting gestures correctly. In order to create statistical models of every letter of an alphabet, Amar recorded airwriting data from 22 volunteers. They had to write characters, words, and sentences in the air, and we then tested the system on the data we recorded from them, Alma says. The airwriting system has an average error rate of 11%, which means that just over every 10th word is wrong. When adapted for the individual user, though, this drops to around 3%. That's because everyone has their own block writing styles, even if they all write in block capital. So if you adapt it for the individual user, it gets a lot better, says Alma, quickly adding that decreasing the error rate is something he's working on. Alma slips on the gloves himself, showing me how it still recognizes words even when he traced out tiny letters into his hands. That way, it's not so distracting, he says. The air writing system has been designed so it doesn't have to be turned on when the user wants to write. It's capable of recognizing alphabet-like patterns from among the millions of arm movements we make in a normal day. I test it again by waving my arms around and rummaging in my bag. The system takes no notice of my gestures, while no handwriting blinks on the screen. As soon as I start scribbling the word science in midair, It switches back to handwriting mode and identifies the word. Disability. Much of the research into gesture interfaces is focused on the recognitions of single gestures assigned to a certain command, such as opening an application on a smartphone by gesturing from right to left in front of the screen. But there's a limit to how many gestures people can or want to remember. The strength of an alphabet-based gesture interface is that people already know their ABCs. But the question now is how to incorporate the gestures so they can control a phone. KIT professor Tanya Schwartz is part of the Airwriting research team and ALMA supervisor. She says she can imagine Airwriting being integrated with devices such as Google Glasses. The integrated screen in the glasses would give you an idea of what the phone is doing and whether the text you type is what you actually want to say, says Scott. In that case, a handheld device wouldn't even be necessary, but there's working to be done yet. Schwartz and Alma won a 2013 Google Research Award worth $81,000 to further the development of their Airwriting system. No easy way to German for Syrian refugees. More than 24,000 Syrians have fled to Germany since the beginning of the civil war in their country 2.5 years ago. Many risk their lives through illegal entries, as there are few legal ways. The Greek Coast Guard ends the dream of many Syrian refugees hoping to enter the European Union by stopping their boats near the eastern Aegean Islands in the Mediterranean and sending them back to Turkey. Many Syrians have been trying to use these routes to enter the EU since the closing of the Turkish-Greek land border in the summer of 2012. The journey is risky. Since August 2012, 149 people have lost their lives in the sea between Turkey and Greece, according to the Hardly Anyone Come Legal. The journey is risky. Since August 2012, 149 people have lost their lives in the sea between Turkey and Greece, according to the human rights organization Pro-Asli. Most of them were Syrian refugees. The fact that they choose this path shows that they have no choice, says Bernd Meskovic, Deputy Managing Director of Pro-Asli. Those who actually reach the EU via Greece and manage to enter Germany almost always are allowed to stay. More than 95% of Syrians who apply for asylum either receive refugee protection or other permits to stay in Germany for at least the duration of the war, according to the Federal Office for Migration. Those who enter via other EU countries such as Bulgaria or Italy must return and apply there due to laws that require immigrants to apply for asylum in the country they first entered. Greece is an exception because of poor conditions for refugees there. That means Syrians who manage to enter Greece despite tough Coast Guard checks and can hope for help in Germany. hardly anyone come legally. Approximately 2.2 million Syrians have fled since the beginning of the riots 2 years ago. About 24,000 of them have come to Germany, according to the German Interior Ministry. Most of these have relatives in the country but have entered illegally, according to the Mescovic, due to limited legal ways to do so. Among the legal options is the German government's programs to accept 5,000 Syrian refugees. The people are selected by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR. Those with family in Germany or are still children or seriously injured have already arrived. The remaining ones will be selected by the spring of 2014. Many more were supposed to be in Germany by now, but a complicated selections progress have delayed their arrival. High barriers to legal entry. German states also have specific programs for Syrian refugees. These, however, are solely for Syrians who have family in Germany and have fled to one of Syria's neighboring countries, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, or Turkey. Mescovic views the conditions for these programs as too rigid. We do not believe that a serious number of people can take advantage of this opportunity, he says. Most states, for instance, require that the relatives living in Germany bear all costs for the refugees. The relatives must have a monthly net income of up to 2,000 euros and a health insurance for the relative entering the country. Only very privileged Syrians can offer that, says Mescovic. Most Syrians are excluded due to this condition. The numbers clearly show that only 140 refugees have entered Germany through this program since 2011, according to the Interior Ministry. Politics calls for action. The opposition's Green and Left parties are demanding that Germany should be open for more Syrians, given the high number of refugees. Everything else is completely inappropriate in this situation, says Kartin Georgin Eckhart, Green Party chairman in Parliament. The parties are calling for an opening of EU borders to Syrian refugees. Even the German Minister of the Interior sees a need for action, though not from the German side, but at a European level. I believe we need to take in further refugees, says Hans-Peter Friedrich in early September. I demand a European conference because this is an issue Europe must answer together. To date, not such conference has been organized. As long as the many hurdles remain for Syrians to legally enter the EU, many of them will continue to pursue legal routes. Those who can raise the money will try to enter the EU on their own, or with the help of smugglers in the hope of dodging the Greek Coast Guard. Helping the next generation. Experts at the Warsaw Climate Conference agreed that greenhouse gas emissions are still rising. Without radical change, the next generation could inherit a much warmer world, but we can still reverse the trend. According to a report commissioned by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, renewable energies could meet almost 80% of global energy requirements by 2050.